Okay, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to our third Power Up webinar of the year. This one's titled Mastering the Annual Budget Process. My name is Thomas Meredith, and I will be helping moderate today's session. Joining us today is Randy Mislovic, the Managing Director of the Resource Management Institute. And we're excited to have RMI board member Molly Weil joining on today's session as well as a guest speaker. So we're scheduled for 30 minutes this morning, so let me cover just a few items and then I'll get out of the way. We have made a PDF copy of the deck available to you if you're interested. In your handouts window of your GoToWebinar panel, you can download a PDF copy of the deck if you wish. We are recording the webcast and we'll be getting that link out probably later this afternoon. And we'll also have a Q&A session at the end of the webcast. So as we're going through the content, if something triggers a question for you, just enter it in the questions window of your GoToWebinar panel. We'll pull those and have a quick Q&A at the end. I know we only got you for 30 minutes today, but it's important that we want to answer any questions that you guys have about today's content. Okay, good. Let's get started. Leading us off today is Randy Mislovic. Randy, welcome. I'll hand it off to you.
Perfect. Thomas, thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome everyone to our third Power Up of the year, Mastering the Annual Budget Process, specific to resource planning. I want to take a moment and thank our sponsors for this event, MavenLink, Keyed In, and Kimball Applications. We really appreciate the support of the Institute and the work that they're doing in resource management. This is the time of year where companies that are, particularly those on a calendar year basis, are contemplating their annual budget for 2020. So hopefully we pick this time of the year to do this because it seems to be on a lot of organizations' minds, and thought this content would be helpful to all of you. If you're not familiar with the RMI, we are, in a nutshell, dedicated to the advancement of resource and workforce management thought leadership, and we do that in a variety of ways, via best practice definition and development, and a lot of that you can get through our website via our various market research work we do, white papers we distribute, we do training and education in the space for resource management, and we run events like this on a regular basis to help communicate and educate people that are interested in resource management discipline. Focus on things like better project performance, resource utilization, customer satisfaction, and now we're also focused on employee engagement and ways we can use better resource management to help with the ongoing challenges related to employee retention. So a lot going on there. I hope you come visit us at our website, and this is a quick picture of what it's like at resourcemanagementinstitute.com. You notice in the upper right-hand corner, one of the wonderful things about the RMI is you can join for free. And you get access, once you join, you get in behind the firewall, and you get access to a lot of information to allow you to collaborate with, not only us, but with other people involved in the Institute through various events and community forums and things that we sponsor. To innovate through various best practice information that we have, our RMCP program for professional certification resource management is an example, and insights that we have relative to market research we're doing in the area. And of course, education is resource management courses, including introduction to resource management and our full-fledged recertification program. So with that, if you're not familiar with resource management, we hope you'll come to our website, join, and check us out, and see if we can add some value to your work that you're doing. So with that, let's get on with the topic at hand, mastering the annual budget process for resource planning. We have an advisory board. There are 10 members of the board, and Molly Weil is going to be speaking here in a moment, is one of those members of the board. But we got together at our annual conference in Dallas last year, getting together again in a few weeks at our second annual conference, which I'll talk about here at the end of the event here. But we got together and talked about this whole issue of the annual budget process. We had 8 different companies who were represented, and their most senior people in their resource management areas. And we talked a lot about the annual budget challenges that we're having, and some tips and techniques that they had and advise relative to how we could do better with this annual budget process. And so I want to talk with these, and then I'll provide a little bit of construct to putting these things together into a framework that might be hopefully helpful to you as you're engaging relative to the budget process. So from a process point of view, one of the things that we find that gets left out too often is to really have agreed on working assumptions. So if you have HR and finance and delivery and other organizations contributing to, what are we going to budget for resources in the coming budget year? What are those working assumptions? So an example that we used was, target utilization rates. If you're assuming 65% and the finance organization's assuming 75%, well, there's a big gap there, and you got to work through those as an example. But make sure everybody's got the right working assumptions. We see this all the time, that people working off a very, very, very different set of guidelines. Inputs and outputs. I talked about this at a webcast I did yesterday. There are a lot of inputs that generally will get bypassed when we're going through this budget process. But we all know whether you're in a project-based organization of professional consulting services, or if you're an enterprise IT, or if you're in a product development shop, there are a lot of different organizations, internally and externally, that create demand for those delivery resources, whether they're billable, not billable, productive use. Our enterprise IT work is, have you really defined all the inputs and outputs? And again, another place we see people struggle is not having done that. Getting the right people involved. It's not just finance and the business units, it's delivery clearly involved. Sales involved, by the way, because delivery is important on the PS side for making sure you can deliver against their things that they're selling, as an example. So getting the right people involved is another one. So really think through your ecosystem. Unplanned work. This happens in every kind of project-based business. New client comes in, CEO wants a new enterprise IT project involved, the engineering decides to launch a new product, whatever it might happen to be. You're in a project-based, marketing agency, new opportunity comes in that you weren't anticipating. How do you deal with and handle that unplanned work as it relates to that process, that budget that's going to get set here in about 90 days for a budget year that is sometime next year? So really, really important that we look at that. All the time buckets, are they being looked at? A, are you measuring them? And B, have you really thought about making sure you're incorporating into it, PTO, sick time, personal development, professional development, those sorts of things that consume time. How granular are your skills needs? Too often we find people are doing this at the headcount level, and sometimes you just got to go deeper because the cost of certain kind of resources might be that different. It's really important we do that as opposed to using some average numbers. So get the granularity that's really relevant to produce a forecast that's more in line with what is really going to happen. How do you incorporate forecast third-party resources, right? Sometimes, typically, third-party resources cost us more, and therefore having some strategy about how we use third parties is important, and how we forecast that also important. Is your annual budget static or fluid? This is probably one of the biggies that we see. Is the old way of doing this was we set a budget for people on January 1, and you got to stick to it to the end of the year. And if you need an extra 10 people, it's kind of tough sledding relative to that. We've been encouraging organizations to move to a more fluid budget process as it relates to delivery resources, because as we all know, on January 2nd, things start to change, and therefore your budget assumptions are likely to have changed and produce the outcome. So you have to have a way to be able to modify the budget. Data and data integration is also another issue. Is the data to do this typically will come from a variety of places, multiple spreadsheets, your PSA, PPM, RPM systems, HCM tools, forecasting tools, wherever it's coming from. Is that data integrated? And by the way, do you have the right data? And is there high integrity in that data? Do you have some data sources that are in conflict? These are all things that the organization says that people tell us are really important for them to get successfully through the budget process. These are, so some of the tips I've offered are really fall into the area of best practices. So anyway, so from there, by the way, that page, if you download a PDF, I really recommend, print that page off, stick it someplace that's handy as you're going through your budget process, and think about each of those points. It'll help you get through the budget process more successfully with a better result. For those of you who have taken our RMCP certification program, this is a page right out of the curriculum. We teach a three-part approach to capacity planning in that program, and we We talk about business planning, which are where you establish the parameters and the baseline of planning for the coming budget year, whenever that budget year happens to occur. And typically that's a 6 to 18 month window that we're doing that planning around. And that's really what we're talking about here on this webcast. But I wanted to show you where that in our minds fits within the bigger picture, because back to this point I made about fluidity to your budget, it's important that be considered and be an important part of how you do this. At the staffing level, I'll move to the right here, this is the day-to-day stuff. We are triaging projects, we're staffing new projects, we're rolling people off projects and on to new ones. There's this tactical stuff that goes on a day-to-day basis. So it's important that's obviously going on. That's typically stuff that's happening in a very short window, generally over the next month or so. And then there's this piece in the middle, which is the living plan. As we know, as the months go on in a new budget year, things change. A deal didn't happen we were expecting. 3 deals did happen that we weren't expecting. 3 people quit, 5 people joined. We had some difficulties in training. We got a new group through a new class, whatever it might happen to be. But having some kind of an approach to then looking out 1 to 6 months to get your budget right, really, really important to the forecast process. So I won't spin off any further on this, but I wanted to show you again, when we teach this 3-part approach, we talk about these 3 things. And today, though, we're really focused on this business planning element, which kind of sets the stage or a baseline from which your tactical work is done and your living plan or the 6-month forecast is being worked from. So for professional services organizations on the line, sales projects, sales would typically project how many of each project or service you're doing. Delivery would translate that into some kind of resource needs. We would obviously look at our in-flight projects that are going on, and then projected capacity needs are compared to current capacity to establish a baseline capacity plan. If you're in enterprise IT or product development, typically these are, we have, generally more insight into what's coming, particularly in those operational, keep the lights on kind of stuff. Product development typically thinks about these things pretty long term as well. But whatever their inputs are have to be translated to real granular enough resource needs that you can use those to help guide your budget planning. Then resource needs that are associated, with delivery, or typically we put this into a plan we call t-shirt sizing. You don't have to be perfect at this, and you're not going to be perfect at it, but trying to get your capacity needs at some level with enough granularity that it's reasonably close to what's more likely to happen, with some bounds around that on the high and low side. And then resource needs associated with delivery backlog. With your delivery backlog, those things that are in flight need to be included, and then of course you compare the two and come up with where your gaps or your surpluses are, and create your plan for the year. So anyway, I hope that helps. And again, this is another great slide to take with you out of this deck, and hopefully that'll be helpful. So I'm going to conclude my piece before I introduce Molly here with just a few tips from the trenches. Is make sure you get you really understand the people are involved, understand the benefit of thoughtful data-based resource planning. Make sure the group is aligned on working assumptions. I mentioned this is really important. Moving to a more fluid budget process is important. The data integrity we see all the time as being an issue. People working with conflicting data or inaccurate data, and produces unfortunately, it's a garbage in, garbage out syndrome. And then last is continuous improvement processes work great in this area of forecasting. So with that, those are some insights from the Resource Management Institute. Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Molly Wild. Molly is a resource capacity management professional, currently consulting at Upshur Smith Laboratories, where she supports product development and operational organizations. She's really deep in the theory and application on things like skills inventory, demand forecasting, capacity planning, process governance. We work with her as she's been a board member now for a better part of a year, and she's got great insights and has some on this topic. She received her RMCP training from the RMI back in 2015, and prior to Upshur Smith, she worked for Medtronic. She also serves on the board. And with that, Molly, I'll put up your first slide and turn the agenda over to you.
Thanks, Randy. I appreciate it. Thanks for the introduction and also for the content. I'm grateful to take a couple of minutes to build off some of those insights with a bit of my own experience, some of my own observations. One of the premises, I think, of this webinar is that successful project execution requires both the right dollar capital and labor. I think it's a statement that sits pretty well with logic. The best laid plans require people to carry it out. Yet sometimes it's a truism that can be overlooked. And one of the things I think about is how does the RMO know if labor imbalances are contributing to under-execution in your organization? What are maybe some of the observable symptoms? One might be a consistent pattern of projects underspend. Now, admittedly, underspend can be caused by a number of things. Technical challenge, for example, poor dollar estimating, or sandbagging as it might commonly be called. But I would argue that when the problem of underspend is pervasive through the full portfolio, its underlying cause might be labor, lack of availability of the right people to progress the project per plan or to spend as fast as the plan. Another potentially obvious symptom is an overall increase in project length. And I'm not talking about 1 to 2 outliers in your portfolio, but an increase in the average duration of projects. Finance functions generally have an excellent handle on dollars. Less often, finance functions have sightline to labor. So labor insight from the RMO paints an integrated picture. It's a unique value to answer not only do we have sufficient direct dollars to fund the portfolio, but do we have enough people? And not just total people, but the right skills to execute the portfolio. I think the answer is critical, not only during budget planning, but throughout the year. For the sake of this conversation, we're talking about the budget. So establishing there is unique value in the RMO. How does the RMO position itself to add value to the organization? And Randy, I'll have you progress that slide 1 if you would. So how does the RMO position itself to add value? In most organizations, I think the RMO has not traditionally been considered a significant player in the budget process. So how does the RMO earn that seat at the table, or if you've been given one, prove you deserve to keep it? Perhaps the most obvious and number one, you must have the data ready to support the process. This means engaging in continual iterative forecasting that is not necessarily driven by the AOP or by the budgeting process. I think Randy really nicely laid out in his three-part approach what that looks like. Even though we're talking to the left hand of that slide, it's a process that feeds itself, the ability to have good, credible forecasting data. So in short, you must be excellent at the discipline of forecasting. Processes must be in place such that credible labor insights are available to you and therefore the business at any time. We should not be in a place where it takes the stick of the budget planning cycle to trigger a refresh in the forecast that takes 2 months to get before we have anything of value. This looks like then at all times knowing the FTE committed to in-flight work. It means knowing the FTE available for new work at all times. The data should be maintained at a person, role, and functional level, data that can be rolled up and down. And we should always have a great understanding of our most constrained roles or functions. So if that first point, how we position ourselves for value, is about continual, credible understanding of in-flight forecast and labor, I would say number 2 is the ability at any time to quantify the labor impact of new work on the portfolio. So for example, and this is particularly true during the budget planning cycle, the business might say, we're considering introducing 9 development projects in the upcoming fiscal year and 15 cost reduction activities. They may say, what is the impact if that work is front-loaded? What if it's back-loaded? What if it's evenly distributed? What skill sets might we have an imbalance of? To do that kind of scenario planning, I recommend the use of actual validated resource templates to scenario plan. Randy referred to this. He called it t-shirt sizing. I call it resource templates. What is a resource template? It's a model. It's a model that directionally predicts the resource requirements to deliver a project by skill, FTE, and duration. Depending on your business, you might have 3 models. You might have 10. For example, for your business's portfolio, large, medium, and small development projects might be sufficient. Or your models might look something like internal development, partner development, cost reduction process. Regardless of your number, how do you build these resource templates? In the beginning, and this has been my experience, your templates, the data that fills those templates may be little more than back of the napkin estimates from delivery leaders based on their experience with the way work works. But if individuals in your business report actuals, your initial estimates may be validated against those actuals. This validation is an iterative process using what has actually happened on real projects to define the average project of that type. So equipped with those templates and an effective tool or system to integrate with your in-flight forecast, the RMO is positioned well to partner with finance and the business in scenario planning. So if those are the 2 tools an RMO needs to add value, a credible understanding of in-flight and the ability to engage in the impact of new work, those are the 2 tools, but both of these things, they're practically meaningless without positive relationships with both finance and the business. And it takes time to build credibility in the forecasting process. In many cases, the RMO enters as a less familiar player. Often there's a large disconnect between what the front end of the business believes it takes to do work and what it actually takes to do work. And waiting to share these insights until the AOP or the budget cycle, it won't be effective. The business needs to have sightline to the RMO process, to the solid backbone of best practice your forecasting approach is based on. To be believable, and this is as equal an effort in some cases as building the discipline itself. But with these partnerships in place, the RMO is well positioned to add value in a manner that's unique and bottom line impacting. So with that, Randy, I'm gonna turn it back to you to close us, or perhaps to Thomas.
Wonderful. Molly, thank you for being willing to share some of that. I hope that was helpful to folks. And again, those slides will be in the PDF deck that's available to you, as Thomas talked about earlier. We're going to take some questions here. And in the process, I wanted just to take a couple of minutes and tell you about a couple things that are coming up. If you're not familiar with the certification program that I mentioned that Molly is also certified through, it's our first of a kind professional services development resource management development program for resource managers to allow you to learn best practices. You get access to a resource center through our firewall, and an opportunity to collaborate with your industry peers. And the folks who go through the courses tell us this, that interaction with other resource management professionals is really invaluable to the work that they do. We've got more than 400 companies that have put 1 or more people in their resource management functions through this training. If you're wondering, what the training looks like, this is a real high-level summary. There is some prerequisite study, but it's pretty light. It's just some white paper reading we provide you. And the course can be consumed in 3 ways. We have a 3-day classroom version that's on site with an instructor. We have a 6-week version where you do 2 hours a week with some homework for 6 weeks. And then we also now have an on-demand format that you can view 24/7. So 3 different ways to fit your learning style and your budget. We also, the course has interactive lectures and case study workshops, and it is followed with a certification exam, and there is a recertification process. You can learn more about that on the website. We've got a handbook out there you can download to learn about that. The course is $1,895, and that includes everything except travel if you choose to go to one of the in-class versions of the course. If you are a PMP from PMI, we are also a registered education provider for PMI, and we work collaboratively with the organization, and we provide PDUs for PMPs for taking our RMCP course. So I hope that's helpful to you. In the course of that, by the way, we teach you just-in-time resourcing, which is our solution to how you get the right person in the right place at the right time and do that consistently in your organizations. This approach or methodology solution was developed nearly 12 years ago and is in practice by literally hundreds of companies today, and that's what we teach in the certification course. Some of you online may have been with us last year in Dallas. We're coming to Dallas again real soon, but I would mention to you that at the front of our symposium, we're going to be teaching an RMCP class. We do have a few seats available, although it's filling out quick. And if you want to attend the class and the symposium, there's a bundled price on our website for doing that. And then the next online session's coming up on November 19th, and there's some early bird pricing for that. And of course, as I mentioned, the on-demand stuff, you can get 7 by 24, and it's available for $1,795 in the introductory price. So that's a little bit about the RMCP program. And just before we start taking some questions here, the symposium is coming up again. It's our second annual one. We had a large group come last year, and we're looking at probably 35–40% growth this year for the group. We're going to have a combination of both process-intensive content, as well as there's going to be 8 different technology vendors there exhibiting resource management specific solutions as well. We've got some great content, great speakers, some good keynotes lined up. So if you haven't signed up yet, hope you'll join us for the symposium coming up October 9th and 10th in Dallas, Texas. And just again, for the Q&A, I want to thank again Maven Link, Keaton, and Kimball for sponsoring this broadcast. And with that, I'm going to go to the Q&A. And so if you have a question, we're monitoring the Q&A box at this time and would like to take any questions that you might have. Several people ask us about the recordings. Again, there will be a note. If you attended this broadcast, you'll get a note with a link to the recording for the broadcast. So I'm going to just pick off the questions that I see in the few minutes we have remaining. How do organizations best handle budgeting of Agile in your how do organizations best handle budgeting of Agile projects where the content is fixed in a fixed size team? I don't know why, for some reason I can't read the entire question. Thomas, are you able to read that whole question? Because I can't get the box to open up.
Yeah, I'll read it for you, Randy. How do organizations best handle budgeting of Agile projects where the concept is a fixed team for an ongoing duration? So for example, the whole year, for an ongoing duration with variable scope.
So before I answer, Molly, I'll just ask you, is that an issue you've encountered, and how have you handled it there at Upshur Smith? If not, I'll take it.
We are also becoming increasingly agile, but I would love to hear your response here, Randy.
Okay. Yeah. So the concept of a fixed size team is, the good news is it's templated, and so you are able to project against it pretty well. The variable scope thing is obviously part of just about any Agile project I've ever seen. And so I would, come back to that 3-part plan that I showed you earlier. And, we consider, when you're doing an Agile project, that a project or a sprint looks like a project, and that it's more iterative in nature. And so the fixed size team, by the way, concept is not one, by the way, that I'm a big supporter of, simply because I think the teams need to be more fluid if you really want to be efficient at using your resources. But if there are internal reasons why we want to keep those fixed size teams, then the key is then to make sure that you have a good beat on when resources within that team are not being consumed for that particular project or sprint that they're on, that you've got a way to peel those off and put them someplace else where they can be used most efficiently or effectively. And the same thing goes true as if you have gaps in your ability to do scope increases that are occurring with that particular Agile project, that you take the time to or have a mechanism via which that sprint can be considered as a project. You look at your resources, hopefully you have a transparent view of resources and where they're used in the rest of the enterprise, so that you can then make a connection between the need and the people that are available to be able to do that. So It's a big question, a lot of topics. I hope I know my short one. I gave you a little bit of insight of how we think about that, and I hope that was helpful. So, looking for other questions that might have come in to the organization, to the Q&A box here. Here's one. It just says, forecasting for us is really difficult. We never seem to get to be accurate. How do you get your forecast to be accurate over time? When I wrote this methodology or approach to this a long time ago, is that probably the most common concern I heard from people was, hey, you can't forecast this stuff that accurate. It's human capital. But I would just tell you that take an initial stab. Don't try to get it perfect on the first pass. Is get a forecast of what you think, and then look at month to month, looking back, what went wrong with that forecast. And I guarantee you'll find gaps in your methodology for continuous improvement in your forecasting, and over a period of time, you'll get better and better at it, and you'll narrow the window of how accurate your forecasts are over some period of time. So anyway, we'll look at the Q&A box here afterwards and try to answer anything that came in that we ran out of time for. This is a big topic. I hope that organizations found this helpful. Please do download the PDF deck. I hope that's helpful. And again, a link to the recording will be sent out to everybody. So we are right at the top of the hour. And with that, I want to thank everybody for attending, our sponsors for sponsoring the event. And we hope you'll join us for our fourth quarter Power Up that's coming up. I think it's in the early December time. And so I remember it's on forecasting and capacity planning. So you'll be able to learn more about that on our website. So with that, we'll end the broadcast. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time and participation.